A massacre at a law enforcement is searching for why he did it. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. A small Texas community is reeling from the devastation at a Baptist church, where a man in body armor, armed with an assault rifle, killed congregants ranging in age from 18 months to 77 years old. 26 people killed in Sutherland Springs, the deadliest mass shooting at an American house of worship. 8 members of the same family reportedly among the dead, including a pregnant mom and her 3 children. A short time ago, the Texas Department of Public Safety shed some light on the shooter.
The suspect's mother-in-law attended this church. We know that he had made threatening texts from him, and we can't go into details about that domestic situation that is continuing to be vetted and thoroughly investigated, but we want to get that out there that this was not racially motivated. It wasn't over religious beliefs.
In just a moment, Texas Governor Greg Abbott will join me. We're letting him get set. First, though, let's go to Adam Housley live in Sutherland Springs. Adam?
Yeah, Harris, religious belief you heard there in that press conference. Some headlines came out of the head press conference about an hour and a half ago. In fact, a number of them. One of them in regards to the fact that he had some atheist views, and more specifically, he texted his one-time mother-in-law some threatening emails, and she was a member of this congregation. We'd been told early this morning that they felt there was some sort of connection. They had not officially recognized that until the press conference an hour and a half ago, and they do believe that played a part in this rampage here, one that is just hard to understand, hard to conceive. According to reports, he went to a gas station, which is just on the other side of the church. This is a small little town in Texas, postage stamp town in the middle of the fields and range. He was already acting a bit erratic. He crossed the street, got into his car, drove to the church, again, just a short distance away, donned a black mask with a white skull, and went inside the church where he opened fire. Take a listen.
Without getting into too much detail, the subject, it was there was some length of time that the subject spent inside that church in a shooting event. He moved around freely inside the church, but I'm not going to get into his exact dynamics within the church.
According to multiple law enforcement sources we've talked to, they say he went to the front of the church, he sprayed the church, he was in there for some time, as you heard from the FBI. He also walked up to certain people and shot them point-blank, execution style. He was stopped, at least partly, with the help of someone across the street, a good Samaritan who opened fire on the suspect, hitting him, we're told, by law enforcement. Another good Samaritan jumped in the car with him, and they chased him down the street, where he eventually took his own life, they believe, in a county nearby. But again, right now, Harris, the thoughts are all with the victims, of course. The youngest 18 months old, the oldest 77, and right now a number of them are still in the hospital, including University Medical Center, where 3 children are fighting for their lives at this hour. Harris?
Pray for them. Every life is so precious, no matter the age, but the children, of course, are where everybody's focused because of their fight right now for life. Adam, thank you. For more, let's bring in Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He attended a candlelight vigil last night, mourning the victims, bringing comfort to their families, just hours after that deadliest mass shooting in Texas state history. Governor, welcome under these very difficult circumstances. We appreciate your time. I want to start with the message that you delivered at this candlelight vigil and what you're being called upon as a message today to deliver.
Sure. Well, before the candlelight vigil, I spoke in a community center with the families of the victims, and that's when I had the opportunity to speak to them directly. And I got to tell you, it was a very heavy situation, but I kind of explained to them the different perspectives that we all face in life about facing unprecedented challenges that test our faith. This is a community of deep faith, and I pointed out ways in which we are all tested, and that those tests provide opportunities where God reaches out to us, and I urge them to reach back and grasp God's reach to them. And you could tell that it's exactly the kind of message these people wanted to hear, because it is such a religious community. And then we left that community center and went to the candlelight vigil, where the focal point was both on prayer, but also on unity and on love. We understand that what took place in this very small community was the face of evil itself. You could have had a backlash type response, but instead the response that we got was one of unification, one of love, one of leaning on God to provide healing and hope for the future of this community.
Well, Governor, as you're talking, I'm feeling that depth of consoling that you have been giving. And I can imagine, too, people have a lot of questions because of the way that this went down and what we're learning about a domestic violence history that this man had with his family members.
Well, there's increasing information showing that he had domestic violence problems, so much so that it could have been the subject of the court-martial that he received in the United States military. And so there appeared to be a criminally documented record of his violence against his wife and maybe child also, as well as other incidences after he was released from the military. And so this was a very troubled person. Obviously, he had to be deranged to go into a church and execution style kill so many people, including that 18-month-old child and 77-year-old individual. This is horrific. And obviously, this is a person who had severe mental challenges to do something like this.
Governor, we're at a point right now where we are seeing things happen in our nation. We are leaning on each other and there for each other. But there's a lot of talk about mental illness and about hate right now. And as I hear you in your spiritual healing words, I want to ask the question, what do we say to each other about this? Because we can't get political at this time. We got to figure something out.
We do. Part of that, I'd call it a two-step process. Part is putting this in context. And remember, even though we're facing these severe tragedies, whether it be what happened in Sutherland Springs or what happened in Las Vegas or what happened in New York last week or what happened in London early this year, we have acts of evil taking place, and because they are close in time to us right now, we think this is something heavy right now. But put this in the context of history. Look at what happened with Hitler during the horrific events during that era, and Mussolini, and go back in time before that to the earlier ages, the Middle Ages, when people committed horrific crimes. And if you go through the history of the Bible, there was evil that took place from early stages of the Bible to the post-New Testament. And so evil is something that has permeated this world, and that force of evil must be combated with the force of good that is offered up by God. And it's so heartwarming to see the people of this community turn to God, turn to hope, turn to the promise of good overcoming evil.
Yeah, and the fact that this started in a place of worship, you are feathering out, if you will, the lessons of what they were studying and what they believed at that church. We saw it in South Carolina. We unfortunately have been through something like this before, although each one is individual. I want to ask now about moving forward. And sometimes I know your office is tasked with answering the difficult questions because the nation wants to know what they can do and what the next hinge point is for their prayers. So what is the plan right now for supporting the families, the people who are left behind? Is there a timetable for events coming up?
Well, the most immediate timetable is to fully identify everybody who has been killed by this tragedy and make direct contact with the family members and then go through the consoling process and the assisted process. Another thing that is extremely important for everybody in this entire community, not just the family members of the victims, but literally everyone in this 300 or 400 town community, I think they all need to go through some form of counseling. There are heavy hearts and heavy burdens on the shoulders of all these people. And it's important that they be able to get this tragedy off of their chest and off of their shoulders. And so we are providing a large number of counselors to every single person in this community to help them work their way through this process. That's the most immediate need right now.
All right, Governor, before I let you go, I don't know if you're sitting where you can see it, but off to the left of the screen next to you and me is that church. It's video, and I see the American flag in the foreground. There we go. There's our live picture. This is Sutherland Springs, Texas, outside that church where they suffered such great violence and heartache. And Governor, I want to give you the last word. I see that flag is flying at half-staff right now.
Well, both the United States flag that was ordered by President Trump and the state flag ordered by me are flying at half-staff because we are trying to send a message to the people of our state and the people of our nation, how we unite and come together in times of tragedy like this, and we stand united as one nation and one state in support of those who've suffered. And we send our prayers and support to all the families of the victim, and we will be by their side till the very end.
Well, sir, I heard you kind of school us a little bit, not just spirituality, but that talk about mental health. I'm hoping, as you are and many people are, that we'll continue to talk with one another and try to figure things out. Meanwhile, our prayers to Texas. Thank you, Governor Abbott of the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Harris.
Investigators are searching for why the suspect did this. As a lot of new information is coming in on that gunman, including how he got the weapons, he did not have a license to carry, and now the special agent in charge of the Houston ATF division wants to know more about his military history.
Firearms were purchased by the deceased suspect. In general, if an individual has a dishonorable discharge from the military, they would be prohibited from possessing or purchasing firearms. In this specific investigation, we are early in the investigation. We do not have all the documentation yet, so until we can get all the documentation to determine exactly what his discharge was, exactly what his conviction in the military, we will not have a determination on if this individual was prohibited from possessing or purchasing firearms.
Now to the forensics. Let's bring in Ted Williams, a former D.C. police detective and now a defense attorney. Ted, always great to see you and lean on your expertise here, wearing both hats, police officer and attorney. Let's start with the suspect and what we are now learning about these threatening messages that he left behind.
Yeah, you know, Harris, that's a clue as it pertains to motive. The question is, what did individuals know prior to this? If he was sending threatening messages, and from what we've been told, those threatening messages went to his mother-in-law, who was a member of that church. The question is, what duty did she have to perhaps even warn authorities? But nobody, even the mother-in-law, could not imagine that a son-in-law would go into a church and do this kind of carnage. But those messages go clearly to motive.
Yeah, you know, you ask the question, what would people have shared? What did they know? Oftentimes police officers will say, and you know because of all of your years as a detective, the most dreaded call you get is a domestic violence call that has been a chain of events up until that point.
You know, you're absolutely right. And under these circumstances here, it is alleged and it is believed that while in the military, he may have served 12 months for domestic violence. So then he went out and, of course, he bought guns in Colorado and he bought guns in Texas. And, of course, you have to pass a background investigation. So law enforcement is having to look into that. One of the other clues, Harris, I heard is that at the time that he crashed that vehicle after being chased, he phoned his father and said he didn't think he was going to make it. I wonder what did his father know about his mental state of mind? That's going to be a part of this investigation.
Yeah, that's interesting, because now what you're getting to are what are the pieces of the puzzle that they're going to try to pull into place next. What else do you have on your list?
Well, right now they've got to do forensic. They've got to be able to talk to the wife. He was married on 2 different occasions. It's my understanding he lived with his parents and his wife. So they are doing a scrub. If he has computers, we know he did because he had a Facebook site where he was considered an atheist and talked about atheism. So they are looking and scrubbing that to try to make a determination of who knew what. They're trying to even look to be candid, Harris, as to whether there were even accomplices. That's also very significant.
Interesting. Why would you say that?
Well, the bottom line is he may have done this himself, but we know that sometimes in these mass killers, sort of like at Columbine, the Clebo, these 2 guys, they got together. Sometimes on Facebook or online, there are things that are said to other people that may very well been of an encouraging nature to not carry out this so much carnage, but to do something. And so quite naturally, that becomes part and parcel of the investigation, Harris.
Yeah, it's spoken like a true detective. That's very interesting, a new element in all of this. Ted Williams, thank you.
My pleasure.
The GOP effort to pass tax reform is heating up on Capitol Hill. The markup process just got started last hour. It's the debate over changes. Speaker Paul Ryan says the bill is on track to pass his chamber by Thanksgiving. That's quick. And that's up to the Senate. Will lawmakers there deliver? We'll talk with a member of the Senate Republican leadership. Also, former DNC Chair Donna Brazile is speaking out on her claims about the influence the Hillary Clinton campaign wielded over the DNC and the party. And now the Clinton team is pushing back. We get reaction from our power panel, the spokesperson for the RNC, the vice chair for the DNC. Stay close for that.
You want to look at Hillary Clinton, and you want to look at the new book that was just put out by Donna Brazile, where she basically bought the DNC and she stole the election from Bernie. So that's what you ought to take a look at.
It's happening. Republicans are making their next move on what could become a historic tax overhaul. Right now, it's been going on for about an hour and 11 minutes or so. The House Ways and Means Committee is beginning its markup of the GOP tax reform bill. House Speaker Paul Ryan says lawmakers are moving quickly, along with the Senate, to get a bill to the president's desk. Watch.
We're on track for moving this through the House before Thanksgiving. That's our plan. We expect our friends in the Senate to be about a week behind us.
Some Republicans, though, are not yet sold, raising concerns about the deficit and the elimination of state and local tax deductions, or SALT. Watch.
So if this tax bill increases the debt too much, you're a no?
I am a no. I want to make sure that we have reasonable assumptions in the process for growth estimates.
But the state income tax, that would have to take away that deduction would have a really devastating impact on New York State, and it can cause people to leave the state. And the fact is, New York is a donor state. We give $48 billion more to the federal government than we get back. So right now, there is still strong resistance to that.
Missouri Senator Roy Blunt is vice chairman of the Senate Republican Conference and a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Good to have you along board this hour. Thank you.
Harris, good to be with you.
I want to get just one word about the House, because it seems like a lot of pressure if you got to get this done by Thanksgiving. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we really can't act until the House is done. We can't officially work on a tax bill till they've sent us a tax bill. And I just heard the speaker say by Thanksgiving. I hope that's right. And then I hope we act quickly. I think the deadline that really matters is getting a bill on the president's desk and signed into law by the end of the year. I'd be very disappointed if that doesn't happen. And I think it won't have the economic impact it needs to have if we don't get it done this year, but we'll follow the House as quickly as we can, and it's a priority. It's a priority for working families, and it's a priority for growing the economy.
And I would have to imagine that it might get a little bit more politically sticky, if you will, as you go into 2018. You've got a year where you've got midterm elections.
Well, I just think if you let this drag into next year, the big loss is that people can't spend the last weeks of this year and the very first weeks of next year planning on a tax bill with a decade of certainty. That'll make a difference in growth. Our growth right now is better than it's been in 8 years. You know, for 8 years, we've seen hardworking families stuck in an economy where the jobs weren't getting better because the economy wasn't getting better. And there are two ways to increase your take-home pay. One is to take less out of it, which this bill needs to do. And the second one is to have things that create a more competitive economy so you have a bigger paycheck to start with. If this tax bill meets those two criteria, it'll do what it needs to do, and families will benefit, and hardworking individuals will benefit because of that.
You know, I want to talk to you about half dozen or so Senate Republican members who've raised concerns. And I'm curious to know, with that many of them, how big a fight could this be, and what are a couple of the issues that you're dealing with already anticipating?
Well, you know, I think we're waiting to see what the House bill looks like. I'm not on the Finance Committee. I'm sure there's a lot of planning and discussing going on both with members and staff there. But I think a really wise thing for the Senate to do right now is to let the House do its work. Don't begin to draw lines of what has to be in a tax bill or what can't be in a tax bill. Let's see what the House can pass, and then let's see what we can do to make it even better and get it back to the House and get it on the president's desk.
That seems so logical and workable. I wonder if they're listening to you.
Well, I hope they are. I hope they are. And I think in the last 5 days or so since the House bill came out, haven't heard too many senators saying much about the House bill. Most of the discussion, as it should be, is on the House side. You know, it's easy for the House to say bad things about the Senate and vice versa, but there's something so important that I think you're hearing minimal advice from the Senate until the House sees what the House can do, and then we'll see what we can do together.
All right. An exception to that is Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who's worried about small businesses and the pain that they'll feel from what he knows to be currently on the table. And that is not, the pass-through legislation where you have most of what a small business would earn now would be taxed like an individual, which is different than how it is now, and actually puts a bigger burden on them.
Well, I've always thought that was the hardest part of this to write, how you do a pass-through with the idea that the pass-through should mean the small business is as competitive as possible with the corporate structure without using the pass-through as a way to hide the kind of income that all other Americans pay income on. So money that grows the business and goes back into the business should be treated differently than money that people take home as wages. And that's a hard thing to write into law. And Ron Johnson, great businessman, great small businessman in his own right, can be very helpful, I think, in helping work that out.
All right. As we have the markdowns, I'm just curious, any idea where they'll start with their red pen?
No, I'm not sure where they're going to start, but they're looking for ways to be sure that you meet the rules that we've met with a very conservative budget in terms of the amount of growth that's projected is growth that we surely should achieve. And then looking at whatever dynamic scoring capacity is available to see how that $1.5 trillion deficit increase really doesn't turn out to be that because you're going to have an economy that's growing. If we just grow at the 70-year rate after World War II, we wouldn't have any deficit in any plan anybody's talking about in terms of deficit of revenue income. The average for 70 years was 3.4% annual growth. This is going to be the first 3% year in a long time if President Trump can head us toward 3% as we finish the year.
Spending cuts have come up as something that maybe will be talked about as it turns to the Senate. I'll be watching for that as well. Meanwhile, I used to live in Kansas City, Missouri. And from the great state of Missouri right now, Senator Roy Blunt is in the House. We appreciate it. Thank you. Well, tonight in prime time, don't miss Tucker's interview with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Ivanka Trump at the Ronald Reagan Library in California. Here's a taste.
Into you in an elevator and we had like 2 floors for you to make your pitch for the tax plan, what would it be?
Well, there's a dual focus, and that's providing much-needed tax relief to middle-income families and cutting taxes generally so that our businesses can be competitive and thrive in a modern economy and in a global world where there's tremendous competition. And our tax plan accomplishes both of those things.
Come on, pop your corn. Catch the entire interview on Tucker Carlson tonight, as most of us do, at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on the Fox News Channel FNC for the cool kids. The victims. And now we're going to talk Texas, of course, range in age from 18 months to 77 years old. And we are hearing the stories of those who died inside that Texas church massacre. We'll go live to one of the hospitals where some of the victims were taken. And meanwhile, back to Washington, the tragedy is already sparking a fresh debate over guns and mental health. You heard the governor of Texas talking about mental illness and our need to focus on it right here just a few moments ago. President Trump is weighing in on all of it from Asia. Stay with us. And with this Fox News alert about the victims of yesterday's Texas church massacre, we do know that earlier today, police verified the age range of the victims, and we saw it change. 18 months old to 77. Brian Yennis is live outside the University Hospital in San Antonio. And Brian, we say all life is precious, but that 18 months old and the 3 children who are hospitalized now, many people are focused on just how much this hurts.
An unimaginable pain, Harris, and right now we know that at least 15 of the victims remain in area hospitals. Investigators say 10 are in critical condition. We are 45 miles northwest of the First Baptist Church at University Hospital. This is a level 1 trauma center in San Antonio. Of the 9 that were transported here, 6 remain, 3 adults and 3 children. 2 adults were released and 1 child, Harris, sadly has died while here. The hospital is now asking people to get here as soon as they can for a blood drive. They need blood badly. An additional 6 adults and 2 children are at BAMC, or the Brooke Army Medical Center. It's unknown when they'll be discharged, but all of the victims needed surgery yesterday. Brooke is a premier Army hospital. Earlier today, the Brigadier General of the hospital spoke about how their battlefield experienced surgeons, nurses, and technicians were prepared to save lives.
The injuries that we heard reported through law enforcement yesterday are the same kinds of injuries that we see on the battlefield. And for us to translate the way that we provide care on the battlefield to what took place yesterday is very natural for us, and gives us an opportunity to have that expertise that is available to the community here in San Antonio.
An additional victim is in stable condition at Connolly Medical Center. All of this, 26 dead in a tight-knit community of Sutherland Springs, population about 400. Many of those that died all coming from the same family. This is especially hurtful for the Holcomb family. 8 of their members were inside of that church. 8 family members. That's 3 generations of the same family dead. Brian Holcomb, an associate pastor at the church, was killed along with his wife of 40 years, Carla. Brian and Carla had a son. Mark also died, and Mark's 1-year-old daughter killed. Their other son, Joe, survived, but his wife, Crystal Holcomb, was killed, and she was pregnant. 3 of Crystal's 5 children are also dead. All of this, as we also know, reportedly that Frank Pomeroy, the pastor of the church, was traveling at the time along with his wife. Their 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle, also dead. This is a very unimaginable pain, but also, remember, a Christian and tight-knit community. Many are now relying on prayer. Harris.
Brian, thank you very much. The president has weighed in on the shootings and saying that this tragedy is not about guns.
And I think that mental health is your problem here. This was a very, based on preliminary reports, very deranged individual, a lot of problems over a long period of time. We have a lot of mental health problems in our country, as do other countries. But this isn't a guns situation. This is a mental health problem at the highest level. It's a very, very sad event. These are great people, and a very, very sad event. But that's the way I view it.
Democrats, however, are calling for stricter gun laws. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy said this in a statement: as my colleagues go to sleep tonight, they need to think about whether the political support of the gun industry is worth the blood that flows endlessly onto the floors of American churches, elementary schools, movie theaters, and city streets. Back from the outnumbered couch, the opinion editor for the Washington Times and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. I not only see you shaking your head, but I see you looking angry when I say those words.
Yeah, you know, you have an event like this, and it's such a senseless tragedy. And to have politics immediately inserted into it, you have politicians who, they're not seeking to fix the problem. They're not genuinely trying to start a conversation about this. They just want to score political points, and they want to say things. And anytime you hear what I'm talking about, the gun industry, it's not the gun industry that supports gun ownership rights in this country. It's individual citizens, good citizens like those 2 heroic people who were armed and engaged fire with this lunatic hell-bent on murder. And I'm for one am glad. I'm so grateful that we're in a country where those good people had that gun.
All right, I could talk a little bit about what happened with the background check and all of that, but we talked about it on Outnumbered. I want to stay focused on the victims right now. And I also want to stay focused on a situation where you let somebody with domestic violence, and by you I mean us as a community, and potential mental illness roam. There had to have been red flags. Charlie, there always are. There always are. So my question to you is, we have had this hurt about mental illness. 1994, Susan Smith drove her kids into that lake.
Yeah.
Las Vegas, 500 people injured, 58 dead, including the gunman. 57 victims in that. We said we were going to talk about mental illness then. Why can't we talk about it in this country?
It's incredible. And when you go back over the past 10 years and you look at the horrible events that are like this that we have seen in almost every single case, You can also find prescription, psychotropic drugs that were prescribed to this person because of their mental illness. We don't know that about this one, but there is no doubt that obviously this guy is clearly deranged. But of course, I
got to get you to the point that you and I talked about in the commercial break. Lists. You think this is about making lists and people's resistance to doing it?
I do, and I think that that is a reasonable resistance also, I think.
Putting people on a list
because the way this works is, and this guy should have been on the list because he was convicted in a court of domestic violence. Why he wasn't on that list is the reason, that's what led to these people who are dead. The other questions get a little bit more complicated, and that is, do you want psychiatrists to be able to put people on lists that get matched against when you do an instant background check? When you go through that form, it asks you if you were, if you've ever been convicted in a court of law of domestic violence, and obviously this guy had been in the Air Force, and so. That gets into a very scary area.
Do you want doctors to have that kind of power is what you're asking?
Exactly. And I don't, and this is what I think is very disingenuous of a lot of Democrats who are making these political arguments out of this, is that I want them to answer that question. Is that what they want? Did they want Obamacare to be required to submit lists of crazy people so that they can be, have that looked at when these background checks.
We're not going to find all the answers right now, but what we need to do though is this.
Have an honest conversation.
That was uncomfortable, even talking about the list, because you're like, well, who would you give that responsibility to?
Yeah.
Charlie Hurt, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. Democrats in damage control mode after one of their own leaders dropped a bombshell about the Clinton campaign's influence over the DNC. Now Donna Brazile is also revealing she considered a plan B to replace Hillary Clinton after a fainting spell raised questions. Can she do that? Team Clinton is pushing back. We get reaction from both. Listen up. The DNC and the RNC right here next to me, moments away, the Power Panel. Donna Brazile firing back at Democratic critics of her explosive tell-all on the 2016 campaign, saying in a fiery interview that they can all, quote, go to hell, her words. This is the former interim chair of the DNC explains why she considered swapping out Clinton for Joe Biden after Clinton's fainting spell in the final weeks of the campaign. Now Hillary's campaign is pushing back hard, saying Brazile's allegations are simply not true, and the primaries were not rigged in Hillary Clinton's favor to the detriment of Bernie Sanders. Former Clinton campaign manager Robbie Mook.
The allegation she's making there simply isn't true. And both the Sanders campaign and the Clinton campaign signed agreements with the DNC. The difference was Hillary Clinton actually raised money into that. And both campaigns were told if you raise money in, you'll have some say over how it's spent to prepare for the general election.
Power Panel today, RNC spokeswoman Kayleigh McEnany. Michael Blake from the vice chair at the DNC. Michael, I'm going to start with you. There's infighting in your party, and it is ugly. And Donna Brazile says she was treated like a slave at the DNC.
Well, first and foremost, our thoughts and continual prayers goes to everyone in Texas that was impacted by the tragic loss of life in Sutherland Springs on yesterday. We're focused on winning elections tomorrow. In Virginia, which is where I'm at right now, and across the country. That's what's all of our priorities in Virginia, New Jersey, et cetera. As it relates to the news that came out from the book, look, the reality is this. First of all, there was no rigging that happened, plain and simple, period. Both campaigns signed a joint fundraising agreement, and we move on from there. When we think about the conversations that emerged over the weekend as it relates to possibly replacing Secretary Clinton was a remarkable candidate, a tireless candidate.
All right, let me step in there.
Frankly,
Could Donna Brazile have
Donna
honestly...
did not have the power.
Okay,
she doesn't have the power to do that. And so the reality is it's a moot point. It was a conversation starter. But the real conversation we need to be having is that in less than 24 hours, people across this country, a third of Americans will be voting across the country. And that's what we're focused on.
All right. You're talking about that Gillespie race, and it is tightening. Kayleigh, I want to go to you, because if what Michael is saying is true, Donna Brazile was not telling the truth.
No, look, what Michael is doing is he's adopting the same inaccurate talking point that you played at the beginning of this segment from Robbie Mook, former Clinton campaign manager. Look, so what they are saying is that they both signed this agreement. Bernie Sanders signed this agreement. Hillary Clinton signed this agreement. One major difference that ABC News pointed out, Hillary Clinton had a side agreement called a Memorandum of Understanding she signed in 2015 that said she would decide who the communications director is. She would decide all messaging, how the money was spent in the party. She had control from Brooklyn. This document exists. Robbie Mook wants to ignore it. And I think I'm just questioning you, Michael. Why won't you reject this tyrannical squelching of Democratic voters across the country? Your own chairman is being definitely silent on this, saying the same failed talking point that Bernie Sanders somehow signed the same agreement. Why not reject the rigging of the system instead of standing by it? I mean, Jeff Weaver, Bernie Sanders campaign manager, has called on you to do it. Will you reject it?
So, Kayleigh, you have absolutely no credibility on this. On April 13, 2016, you went on national TV to convey that you thought the RNC was disenfranchising Republican voters in multiple states. That's a commentary that you actually had on CNN. Number two, also when we talk about the credibility of the argument that was communicated was about the general election, which for some reason you failed to include that itself, which again, since Secretary Clinton had 4 million more votes, she won the primary, she became our nominee, and she moved forward in that manner. So
let me explain to you something, though.
Every time I talk to a Democrat, the vote count gets larger. It goes from 3 to 4 million. Kayleigh, go ahead and respond, because we're going to run out of time.
Michael, since you brought up my past statement, no, you've got to let me respond, Michael. You brought up my past statement.
I said in the primary,
here's the difference. Michael, instead of filibustering, let me respond, since you brought up my past statement. I did say that in 2013, but guess what? Guess what the RNC did? Guess what the RNC did in the wake of this criticism from the Trump campaign and the Cruz campaign? I and others were called into a room at the RNC. They explained to us the transparent process, how they were going to treat this, and they fairly litigated this election and allowed Donald Trump to become the head of the party because the voters spoke. You on the other side were hiding an agreement, coordinating Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders supporters across the country should be outraged at what you did. You stole an election from Bernie Sanders.
I'm going to step in here, which is why we're going to win in Virginia tomorrow.
We're going to bring you back after the commercial break, but I have to say this before we go, and maybe you'll want to respond when we come back. Donna Brazile says that the DNC was run like a plantation and she was treated like a slave. As a person of color, I would think that you would have something to say about that. We'll be right back.